I'll be keeping there, and I would request Dr. Rishi Verma ma'am, Dr. Verma and Dr. Viveka sir to take one sweet each before they only one sir, because there is not much sir. There is not much. Ma'am, over to you please. Friends, ladies and gentlemen, it's my proud honor to welcome you to CME number 976 over the last 21 years.
So thank you, Dr. Chauhan, and a very good evening to all my respected seniors and my dear colleagues. It's been my privilege to lead a deluge of physicians from, I think, all specialities today in this forum. So thank you, sir, for giving me the opportunity. And as sir has already described that we are short of time, so my sincere apologies from both the speakers to be leaving early, and a sincere apology from my side as there may be a slight change in my voice since I'm recovering from a respiratory infection also. So kindly bear with that. Thank you. So we start with MASLD and its ideal screening and management in our country. MASLD, as Dr. Chauhan said, earlier was known as NAFLD, and it is affecting more than 30% of the adult population globally. It is definitely characterized by accumulation of fat in the liver and one more comorbidity, whether it is obesity or diabetes or hypertension. So to bring any disease in perspective, we always discuss a case. So here is a case of Mr. X, who is a 46-year-old male presenting for a routine follow-up in our OPDs. BMI 29, type 2 diabetic patient for last 4 years on metformin 500 twice a day and glimepiride 2 mg once a day. And during consultation, the physician has recommended a liver evaluation also. So this is highlighted because our main, I would say the key takeaway for today's talk will be that during every consultation, we must recommend a liver evaluation to a patient who is at risk in terms of the liver enzymes, the FIB-4 index, and a FibroScan. So this particular patient, his AST, ALT values are within normal limit. FIB-4 index of 1.9, we will discuss what is FIB-4 in further slides, and which suggests an indeterminate risk of fibrosis, a CAP score of 340, which suggests the steatosis grade 1, and a liver stiffness measurement in kilopascals of 11, which suggests that he has fibrosis grade 2 also. So basically the talk will focus on what should be the management approach for a case like this, which we encounter in our OPDs. So 589 million adults worldwide living with diabetes in 2024, and this number is expected to go up to 853 million by 2050. In our country, we have 89.8 million adults with diabetes. This was 2024 data, which is 10.5% of the adult population. And India now has over 101 million diabetics and 136 million pre-diabetics with a national prevalence of 11.4. So here, why we are discussing this is the emphasis that these chronic lifestyle diseases are going to have in our country in terms of the economic burden, in terms of the health burden, in terms of the clinical burden. Obesity is also affecting 180 million people in India, and metabolic syndrome is prevalent in 1:3 urban Indians. So insulin resistance is the root cause for MASLD, and we know that it causes hyperinsulinemia, hyperglycemia, which have an effect on the healthy liver, and due to the environmental factors as well as the genetic predisposition, it leads to a decrease in the adiponectin, an increase in the free fatty acids and the triglycerides. So basically there's a lot of cellular inflammation, apoptosis, and a reactive oxygen species which is getting, which is happening in the liver and as well as in the body. So in the liver it is mainly the lipotoxicity in terms of inflammation, apoptosis, and the oxidative stress, which leads to MASH and end-stage liver disease. So, we will maybe take these questions towards the end, but yes, insulin resistance should be a cornerstone management approach for MASLD. And in routine practice, how do we approach or improve the insulin resistance? Through all the three, I would say, through diet modification, through exercise, through weight reduction, and through pharmacological agents. So the MAP study gave us the prevalence of fibrosis and cirrhosis as well as MASLD across the country. Here, I would just like to tell that the prevalence of MASID, which is 68.2%, was mainly prevalent in the northern part of India due to the socio-economic factors, the dietary factors, and the lifestyle. The prevalence of fibrosis was to the extent of 33.7% and 12.2% was cirrhosis. MASID prevalence in various metabolic conditions. So the most common comorbid condition associated with MASID is obesity, followed by others like dyslipidemia, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, and hypertension. And there is a very accelerated progress of MASID to MASH in diabetic patients. So again, the highlight of this slide is that as compared to non-diabetics, diabetics have a more than double prevalence of MASID, MASH, cirrhosis, ultimately leading to hepatocellular carcinoma and liver transplant and end-stage liver disease. So MASH is basically a subtype of MASID that we are talking about, which is more common in diabetic population, more prevalent in diabetic population. Fatty liver always is there with some of the other comorbidities, including the MACE and CKD, and you can see the percentage affected patients in terms of risk of MACE, risk of peripheral arterial disease, ischemic stroke, cardiac arrest incidence, CKD, MI, coronary artery disease, AF, and the bradyarrhythmia. So MASID patients are 2 times more prone to develop end-stage renal disease also, with one of the worst CKD prognosis that we can think of. So which patient population do you prioritize for MASID screening in your routine practice? Well, I would say all patients with type 2 diabetes must be screened. Overweight, obese individuals also with metabolic risk factors should be screened. Patients in whom you find elevated liver enzymes should be screened, and definitely individuals with metabolic syndrome should be screened. Patients with PCOS, obstructive sleep apnea, CKD should be screened. So these are some guideline recommendations in terms of the screening algorithm, which has been proposed by all the European prominent societies. So whenever we have a type 2 diabetic patient or an obese patient with one or more cardiometabolic risk factor or persistently elevated liver enzymes, we should calculate the FIB-4 score, which is just, if you type in the Google as a FIB-4 calculator, it has 4 variables and you will get it for your patient. So less than 1.3, very low risk, we can reassess the FIB-4 every 1 to 3 years. If the score is 1.3 to 2.67, again, intensified management of comorbidities is the keyword, and these patients must undergo a fibroscan. So if the liver stiffness is less than 8 kilopascals, again, intensified management of comorbidities should be the key, and a FIB-4 score to be repeated every 1 to 3 years. In case in the fibroscan you have liver stiffness of more than 8, then a definite specialty referral has to be there to a hepatologist. Or if the FIB-4 index is more than 2.67, then again the specialty referral must be there. So talking about abdominal ultrasound, which is also a tool for the initial screening for MASID, well, I would say it is definitely very widely accessible, but it lacks the sensitivity for catching early or the mild MASID cases when better tools like FibroScan exist with us, and only when combined with liver enzymes or the non-invasive scores like FIB-4, we should correlate it with the ultrasound. So obviously every patient we need to see what tests we need to prescribe, depending upon the availability, depending on the patient risk profile. So here are the details of the FIB-4 index, which is a non-invasive tool for early detection of liver fibrosis. It's a very simple, highly sensitive, accurate and cost-effective test to evaluate the presence of fibrosis in the liver. It takes into account 4 variables, that is the age, the AST, ALT and the platelet count. Low cutoff, less than 1.3, almost rules out fibrosis. 1.3 to 2.67 indeterminate, and more than 2.67 high probability of fibrosis. There are some limitations also to this tool in terms of over-prediction in elderly patients more than 65 years, or a lower FIB-4 index cutoff of 2 in them, in which these elderly patients, the lower FIB-4 index cutoff of 2 applies. So not confirmatory assessment and needs further evaluation through the FibroScan or the liver biopsy. But yes, it is a very important tool which we all must use in our day-to-day practice. There was a study which correlated the association of FIB-4 index to CV events, to all-cause mortality and liver events, and it suggested that a high FIB4 is associated with a 33% higher risk of CV events and a 61% risk of all-cause mortality. It is also directly proportional to the liver events. Now just a small word about the commonly used non-invasive tests. We've already spoken about the FIB4 index, but we also have some other non-invasive tests which are blood-based, like the AST platelet ratio index or the APRI, which takes into account the AST, upper limit of the normal AST range, and the platelet count. NAFLD fibrosis score, which has 6 variables: age, hyperglycemia, BMI, AST, ALT, platelet count, and albumin, and an enhanced liver fibrosis or the ELF score, which also takes into account some serum markers. So, as and when required to assess the severity of the fibrosis, we can use these non-invasive tests also. So, do you primarily utilize the FIB4 index to assess the liver fibrosis? I think we all must, as a first-line non-invasive tool to stratify the fibrosis risk for the patient. Now just a word about the FibroScan, which is being used now, I would say, very widely in our practice. It's also called the vibration controlled transient elastography, and it is a dedicated system used as an aid for the management of patients with chronic liver disease. And the point I like to highlight here is that it measures the liver stiffness in kilopascals. So it is a non-invasive quantification of the liver fibrosis. And so we have two parameters that we see in the report, that is the liver stiffness and the CAP, or the controlled attenuation parameter, which quantifies the liver steatosis. So the LSM, or the liver stiffness measurement, quantifies the liver fibrosis, and the controlled attenuation parameter, or the CAP, which is measured in decibels per meter, quantifies the liver steatosis. Again, the CAP score being less than 237, it is steatosis grade 0. So the amount of liver probably showing the fatty changes, you can expect it to be less than 10%. If the score is 238 to 260, it is steatosis grade 1, and almost 1/3 of the liver is affected by the fatty changes. In a score of 260 to 290, steatosis grade 2, about 2/3 of the liver is expected to be affected with fatty changes, and more than 293 it is grade 3, and you can expect that the liver might be more than 67% involved with fatty changes. So how do we evaluate the liver fibrosis using this LSM score? We have two probes. One is M probe for the liver capsule distance of less than 25 millimeter, which we normally use in all our patients, and the XL probe, which is for the very obese patients, where the liver capsule distance is 25 to 35 millimeter. So if the LSM score is less than 7, it suggests absence of fibrosis. If it is between 7.1 to 10, there could be mild fibrosis. 10.1 to 13, moderate fibrosis. 13 to 16 is severe fibrosis, and more than 16 is definitely cirrhosis. So now let's quickly come to the management of MASLD. Yes, we all know, and I think we all suggest to our patients also about the diet and the lifestyle modification in MASLD, which is the mainstay of treatment. So in terms of weight loss, we should encourage the calorie deficit that promotes the weight loss, and 5% weight loss reduction to reduce the steatosis, and 7 to 10% weight loss is predicted to reverse the steatohepatitis. So here again, I would like to say that I think as far as management of all our chronic diseases is concerned, our focus is nowadays on remission of the disease, and that's why we are having all these weight reducing drugs also. And the other point is the shared decision making. So it has to be a shared decision making between the patient and the doctor to discuss the weight loss regimes, the pharmacotherapy as far as weight loss is concerned, the physical activity, nutrition, and some educational programs. So again, as far as physical activity is concerned, we should discuss the goal of performing more than 150 minutes per week or a moderate intensity aerobic activity, and explain to the patient that brief sessions also of even 10 to 15 minutes can be effective ways to reach the goal. As far as nutrition is concerned, healthy eating practices in terms of a high fiber, whole food eating pattern with personalized goals that are low in saturated fat and added sugar. So individuals definitely should abstain from sugar containing beverages. And then we have some support programs also to support the behavioral change of the patient and address the lifestyle modification with medical nutrition therapy. Alcohol, we should assess the intake at every visit of the patient and recommend the minimizing alcohol intake in all MASLD patients. And individuals must abstain if moderate fibrosis is present. So if the score is more than F2, abstinence is advised. Promoting stress reduction and positive health behaviors must also be encouraged to the patients. So the National Program of Prevention and Control of Non-Communicable Diseases has laid out these guidelines in terms of controlling hepatic steatosis. They have recommended a weight loss of more than 5%, a 30% daily caloric restriction, less carbohydrates and fats, total fats not to exceed 30%, free sugars less than 10% of the total energy intake, and encouraging the intake of millets. As far as hepatic fibrosis is concerned, they have recommended a minimum of 7 to 10% weight loss, encouraging a regular meal pattern to the patient, and intake of millets, low fat, low carb, reduced sugars. In terms of hepatic cirrhosis, they advise a modest calorie restriction, restriction of carbs, protein 1.5 gram per kg per day, including millets in the diet, high fiber, low cholesterol and low sugar and no alcohol. So here I would also like to highlight the importance of weight loss and MASLD. So initially it always happens that the patient does have a weight loss, but they are unable to sustain it. So there are, there is steatosis improvement if there is 3% weight loss, and improvement at the cellular level in terms of inflammatory improvement at more than 5%, NASH resolution at more than 7% weight loss, and the fibrosis regression at more than 10%. But the highlight point is sustaining this weight loss at 1 year, which you can see is very less general. So weight reduction is the cornerstone for managing MASLD, but actually how much is it feasible for fatty liver patients to reduce weight and controlling liver fat and fibrosis? Well, not always possible, but they should be encouraged, they should be monitored more closely, their comorbidities have to be managed by us, and lifestyle, behavioral therapy and all this therapies we have to prescribe to our patients. So the global consensus recommendations for metabolic dysfunction associated steatotic liver disease and steatohepatitis has approved medications for MASLD. So there are 3 medications which are approved, that is saroglitazar in India, resmetirom globally, which acts directly on the liver fat, and the GLP-1 RAs also globally. There are some medications which don't have definitive data, but yes, we are using in our clinical practice. That is the UDCA, ursodeoxycholic acid, the vitamin E, silymarin, orlistat, and the omega-3 fatty acids. So, vitamin E and UCDA, they are good antioxidants, good anti-inflammatory agents. They will have effect on the steatosis in terms of reduction in the liver enzymes, but they are not, we don't have data as of now to suggest that they could have an effect on the progression of the disease or the fibrosis also. So saroglitazar is the first approved drug in India, which is a dual PPAR alpha and gamma agonist, and through its action, which is mainly on the PPAR alpha, it decreases the fatty acid delivery to the liver, activates the lipid metabolizing genes, reduces the lipotoxicity and the triglycerides and LDL cholesterol. As far as its PPAR gamma action is concerned, it increases the insulin sensitivity and decreases glycemia, hence enhances glucose metabolism. And then it has some anti-inflammatory effects also in terms of reducing the liver fibrosis growth factor and the fibrosis progression. So ultimately, it all accumulates to acting on the liver and reducing the metabolic dysfunction that's happening in the liver and the MASLD disease. Now next few slides are some evidence studies as regards saroglitazar to prove its safety and efficacy. I don't think I'm going to go into very much details of this study, but yes, in short, we have an evidence 4 study in USA wherein a few 106 patients with NAFLD with elevated liver enzymes and a BMI more than 25 were enrolled in the studies for 2 years, and they were divided into 4 arms, 1 milligram, 2 milligram, 4 milligram and placebo. And saroglitazar significantly reduced the liver fat and elevated liver enzyme levels, especially the 4 milligram dose. So that after the study, the 4 milligram dose was decided as the prescribed dose for saroglitazar. Now, as far as the mechanism of action is concerned, we know it is a dual PPAR alpha gamma agonist, has effect on insulin sensitivity, also approved for treatment of hypertriglyceridemia in diabetic patients, reduces the liver enzymes to the extent of 67% reduction in the ALT and 65% in the AST, has an positive impact on metabolic profile in terms of improving the glycemia, triglycerides and the non-HDL cholesterol, reduction of liver fat content, significant reduction to the extent of 40.7%, effect on liver fibrosis, 25% improvement of liver fibrosis grading, and it is recommended by most of the guidelines as an approved therapy for treating our MASLD patients. As compared to UDCA, which is not approved, but yes, definitely it reduces the liver enzymes to some extent and improves the steatosis. So when would you like to use saroglitazar in metabolic patients who have diabetes and obesity with elevated liver enzymes? I would say you should start as early as possible in such patients. Another study, Evidence 2 study, which was, the only difference was that this was a biopsy-driven study, a 52-week trial on patients who were treated with saroglitazar 4 milligrams, and adults between 18 to 65 years with a histologic confirmation of NASH without cirrhosis, with a NAFLD activity score of more than 4 were enrolled, and they had a score of 1 at least in each of the components. So NAS, or the NAFLD activity score, has 3 components, that is steatosis, lobular inflammation and hepatocyte ballooning, which is graded from 0 to 3. So patients who were enrolled in this trial had at least score 0 in each, and a decrease in the NAFLD activity score of more than 2 was observed in 52.3% of patients without worsening of the fibrosis at week 52.
Ma'am, I think you need to...
Yeah, I'll shorten it. Okay, so this is a trial which is just under publication, and again we had an advanced MRI fibroscan study in patients with or without type 2 diabetes, including compensated cirrhosis. Duration of the trial 52 weeks, and there was an improvement in all grades of fibrosis which were noticed in this trial. Again, an extension of this trial which suggested that MASLD patients with compensated cirrhosis, they showed a decrease in the liver stiffness measurement as well as a decrease in the CAP scores, which were measured every 6 months till week 144. So the Indian National Association for Study of Liver 2022 also recommends saroglitazar and MASLD for a minimum of 1 year. And okay, so I think we'll skip the questions. Another study is to establish the safety and efficacy of saroglitazar and MASLD with stage 3 CKD patients. So any drug that we are prescribing these days, we have to be sure that it is renal safe. So there were trials conducted on saroglitazar to establish its renal safety also. And it was proved that it is safe in stage 3 CKD patients and had a neutral effect on eGFR as well as the urine albumin creatinine ratio at the end of this 1 year study period. So in CKD patients, saroglitazar is effective. There is a significant reduction of liver fibrosis, the liver enzymes as well as the triglycerides, and this study proved that in MASLD patients in stage 3 CKD, it is definitely saroglitazar is renal safe and effective in terms of liver and lipid parameters also. So this is another study, Lead India EMR2 study. The full data of the study is under publication, but we have some data on it. And another study which is a phase 4 study which also established the safety and efficacy of saroglitazar. So basically the adverse events also were reported only in 13.6% patients. Majority of them were mild, no treatment related deaths, no discontinuations, and saroglitazar 4 mg showed meaningful hepatic and metabolic benefits with a very good tolerability for all the patients. So I'd like to summarize here by saying that insulin resistance is definitely central to MASLD or MASH development and progression. Diabetes, type 2 diabetes increases the risk of advanced fibrosis, of cirrhosis and hepatocellular carcinoma. A weight loss of 7 to 10% improves the steatosis, inflammation and fibrosis. And we have a drug, saroglitazar, which is a dual PPAR alpha gamma agonist, approved by the government for treating MASL, and it is a very safe molecule for CKD patients also and patients with comorbidities like diabetic dyslipidemia, MASL, obesity, hypertension. As far as the vitamin E, UDCA, omega-3 silymarin are concerned, they are generally not recommended due to lack of evidence. So we still have to have some more evidence on that. So thank you for a very patient listening.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much.
My apologies.
We will just have 3 questions, ma'am. The first question is for me, ma'am.
Yes.
Does MSALD include NASH?
Yes, it does. It was earlier
It does.
called, yes.
It does include.
Yes.
Right. You said the bottom line and the central theme is insulin resistance.
Yes.
And the bottom line is that you have to lose weight at least 5%.
Yes.
Right. Ma'am, only if we were to lose weight by around 20% with lifestyle modification, do we still need drugs or that is good enough?
20%?
So it's a very, I don't think I have seen any patient in my clinical practice who has lost that much weight. But yes, if it happens, then probably it will cause remission of the disease.
Right. One of the key drugs that you mentioned in your table was the GLP-1 analog. And we have very strong GLP-1 analogs now.
Yes.
Suppose I were to use tirzepatide for weight loss, and multiple trials have shown that even 20% is achievable.
Correct.
Do I still need to use saroglitazar or that is good enough?
No, so maybe in the long term, no. But basically you need to evaluate the patient in terms of the fibroscan and other modalities, and then evaluate how much fibrosis the patient is having, and then treat the patient accordingly. So if the patient has fibrosis grade 2 and above, then definitely saroglitazar along with tirzepatide.
One basic understanding from pathology, ma'am, that we were taught in 1982 when I was doing my fourth year in pathology. I wanted to know from you, once fibrosis happens, it is supposed to be irreversible.
Yes.
Fibrosis is irreversible.
Yes.
So how are we talking of reversibility in fibrosis in liver?
So we are not really talking about reversibility, but we are talking about preventing further progression.
Okay, cirrhosis.
Yes.
Right. Dr. Sajid Parvez has a question.
Ma'am, just wonderful discussion, ma'am. I just wanted to know the effect of saroglitazar on macular edema. Is there any study, or is it harmful?
Macular edema.
Like pyroglitazone is.
Yeah.
This is also a PPR gamma.
Yes.
So does it have any effect?
I don't think so, but maybe Dr. Purnima, are you here? Yes. Maybe she can answer this question.
Pioglitazone, being a PPR gamma agonist, causes macular edema, and we have to be extremely careful. Do we have to be careful using your molecule for a possible macular edema?
So in last 13 years, as per we have not recorded even single macular edema. So last 13 years, we have not recorded even a singular macular edema case, because it has to be reported to our, because it's a ZCP molecule, it's a CR molecule. It has to be reported to us, and then we submit, or any of the doctors have not mentioned. It has a different molecular structure. Once we go into the structural part, PPR, dual PPR, saroglitazar is dual PPR, and it has a different molecular structure in comparison to pioglitazone. That is why the macular edema portion does not happen. And it is
So I don't think, sir, there are any studies, but I am not aware of any studies.
Ma'am, just one more thing. What are platelets doing in FIB4 calculation?
So, well, these are variables that we are using. The exact molecular basis of why platelet count is there, I don't think we have ever evaluated. But yes, we are using these 4 variables like age, AST, ALT, and
indicator of portal hypertension and hypersclerosis.
and also,
whenever they tweak the fibrosis, then portal hypertension.
yeah.
Dr.
So platelet count is one of the main liver markers that we do in any.
Right. One question from Dr. Tulsi and one question from Dr. Kalkar, sir. Sir, request. सर शादी अटेंड करनी है, वो नेम देना, लिफाफा या आप ले आओ जाके या वो
So what a nice chapter. So tell us a little more about the drugs that you use in MASL. For example, resveratrol. How do they act? Statins. They are wonderful drugs that should be used here. Metformin. SGLT2 inhibitors. Did well on that. And GLP-1 agonist as well. Not to forget the triple and the dual agonist as well. Talk us a little about these drugs, ma'am.
So sir, actually in one of the trials, the patients who are enrolled were on most of these drugs that you just mentioned, and they do have their own role. For example, resmetirom, that will of reducing the lipid profile of the patient, keeping it under control.
Across the full profile of, irrespective of the child book A, B or C, you could use these drugs.
Yes, yes.
So these are wonderful drug strategies to be used.
SGLT2
And
inhibitors also,
inhibitors as well.
GLP-1 also. So if I
Not
come
only
back to the
GLP-1, but also quintiles, triple quintiles as well to be used. And they seem to be game changers here.
yes.
And not to forget about the Mediterranean diet. You forgot about that. Talk about that.
I did talk about the diet.
Irrespective of the weight loss.
The next stop,
Mediterranean diet
next stop, Dr. Tulsi. We are
has CV benefits and hepatic benefits as well.
So if I come to this case which I presented at the outset of the presentation, if I were the physician for this patient, I would prescribe a GLP-1 receptor agonist for sure for this patient, and along with the saroglitazar also,
What
because
about SGLT2 inhibitor here? Instead of glimepiride?
sir, SGLT, we are also aiming at improving the BMI and weight loss. So maybe SGLT2 inhibitor would not cause that much desired weight
Yeah,
loss.
but combine both of them.
Dr. Kala, sir.
Thank you, thank you.
Dr. Kala.
Ruchi, I'm so delighted. I'm listening to you first time. I remember 20 years back.
Yes, sir,
20
has
years
been my
back, our
teacher.
days, yeah. Anyway, so I am not asking any question. I am just extending Dr. Chauhan's statement of weight loss. Weight loss here is just like these days we are saying solar panel लगवा लो, ज़्यादा produce करोगे तो कंपनी ले लेगी आपसे। तो सर ऐसा ही है, अगर आपने अपने लेवल तक जितना चाहिए उससे ज़्यादा कर लिया तो मैं कहता हूँ कि आपकी नेक्स्ट जनरेशन को फायदा होगा। बोनस। Thank you so much.
Yes, because there are genetic factors also, sir, and also when there is weight loss, strength training and the diet, protein-rich diet has to be emphasized.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
We relieve you from your duties. And Jadis team, please give the cup and the plant to Matt. Okay. And Dr. Verma, thank you very much for making it. Maybe on a relaxed occasion sometimes we meet again, maybe over a drink or water, whatever you want. I request Dr. Viveka sir to please take podium and start his presentation. And I give him exactly 11 minutes to wind up because I saw on the Google it's going to take him at least 37 minutes to reach to Faridabad wedding venue. Sir, please, over to you.
Can I have the presentation? So thank you very much, Dr. Chauhan and so I was cheated today by Dr. Chauhan. Is there any remedy? He told me that at sharp 8:15 he will start the CM. I was here at 8:14. No apology. So,
Now it's 9.
is there a provision of walkover?
मैरिज वेन्यू यहीं पर ही रख देनी थी।
Okay, so Lipaglin is alive. So this is what they say that it is Lipaglin alive. Yeah, so I think if you look at the virtues which Dr. Ruchi has told about this molecule, it's really been, one of the proud thing is that it is an Indian molecule, it's been researched and it has been patented in India. So this is something which is really very nice. And one of the most important things is that apart from working on, the fatty liver and NFP and all, MSLD, it is something which for cardiologists is a boon that there are a lot of patients who come with early pre-diabetes and has got, hypertriglyceridemia, which in Indian population has been found to be a strong risk factor for cardiac disease. And this is a molecule which works on that very potently. So if you look at the cross-sectional study from India, ATP prevalence, which is pattern of dyslipidemia is different in India. So we see that typical, dyslipidemia in Indian patient is LDL is low, LDL is not very high, but triglyceride is significantly high. So major concern is the insulin resistant in Indians, and this is what we call the, the abdominal obesity. So thin fat Indians have got a lot of insulin resistance, and that is the basic problem. And this fat is a poison because it secretes a lot of, inflammatory things, leptins and all, and it is also carcinogenic. So classical dyslipidemic profile in this is elevated triglyceride, reduced HDL cholesterol, and shifts towards small dense LDL particles, which is something really bad, because these are the molecules, and then a lot of people have got genetic predisposition of the high atherosclerosis by virtue of having high lipoprotein lipase. So we have seen a lot of Indians where the lipid, they went and settled in Western, when we were in UK and US, we saw that these immigrant populations were there. And I think there, the lipid profile they did, and that they said that you are not at a high risk, but they did not really do the lipoprotein and LPA and ApoA and all those facilitator agents genetically determined would increase the fat deposition in the coronary arteries in endothelium and cause more malignant coronary artery disease. So we need to, and on top of that, high triglyceride will add to the misery. So hypertriglyceridemia in type 2 diabetic patients is an independent cardiovascular risk factor, and we have seen a lot of data from, especially the first alarm was raised by Dr. Inas Inas, which was a physician from Kerala settled in US, and he produced a lot of evidence-based medicine in favor of this. Until that time, we did not have this saroglitazole or lipaglyn molecule. If you look at the data, that is PARI-2, the higher triglyceride raises the cardiovascular risk. You can see clearly that it is statistically quite significant, and pre-med remnant cholesterol and triglyceride. So we say that this is a residual risk. So if you have controlled the LDL, you have controlled the total cholesterol, but if the triglyceride is high and HDL is low, that is the residual risk, and that is something which is unmet need with the current set of medications. So, you consider the triglyceride to serve as both cardiovascular risk factors as well as cardiovascular risk markers. The answer would be definitely yes. So the triglyceride index is a reliable marker for the cardiovascular risk, and pure study, which is again elevated triglyceride index, signals higher type 2 diabetes mellitus and cardiovascular risk. In fact, if you take more carbohydrate, it suddenly surges the triglyceride and can cause. So we have got a lot of data, even sub-study from the pure show that the people who are consuming white rice, white sugar and potato, they have got 40% higher risk of cardiovascular event compared to people who do not, who are on the millet-based or off carbohydrate diet. So it means that triglyceride, which gets really very high if you are rich in the carbohydrate diet, would increase the risk of cardiovascular disease. So cumulative triglyceride exposure and rising diabetes risk, and probably that is one of the reasons why Indians have got more diabetes, because the carbohydrate-rich diet would really challenge your insulin, and that is the reason why it happens more often than not. So if you look at the ESC 2019 guidelines, there also the high triglyceride reduction is crucial for cardiovascular risk management. So the recommendations are that first of all we should start with the statins, but we need to add this molecule saroglitazole, which will further decrease the triglyceride significantly. And the high triglyceride reduction is crucial for cardiovascular risk management, and that is what has been shown with the RSSTI 2022 consensus decision pathway on triglyceride reduction. So the molecules which is there available right now is the statins. The statin is definitely, that has got a lot of data which shows that if you use this, the risk of cardiovascular event would come down significantly. Fenofibrates have been used, but it is something which has not really turned into those. It will decrease the triglyceride, but the cardiovascular event rate doesn't go down significantly. But saroglitazole is one molecule which has really shown to decrease the triglyceride, and it is really helpful in people who are pre-diabetic or mildly diabetic, because this is a place where, this can cause not only the fatty liver and all, but also it will increase the triglycerides. In fact, there are many cases patient comes with just the lipid profile. We see that the triglyceride is high. We say that you can do your sugar and HbA1c, and we find that they are pre-diabetic. And no wonder that the Cardiology Society of India consensus clinical practice guidelines also on triglyceride management says the same thing. So I think if you look at the triglyceride level, if they are more than 200, we need to really work on them. And saroglitazole has been found to be the more effective, because this, I think the mechanism of action has already been discussed. This is a molecule which improves the glucose metabolism and insulin sensitivity. So it has been seen that people who are in what we call carbohydrate belt, they take more rice, they the carbohydrate predominant diet. I think apart from lifestyle modification, this is a molecule which will improve the outcomes. So saroglitazole tackling non-HDL and the LDL level in dyslipidemic patients who are pre-diabetic. This is something which is a boon molecule and has been found to be really good. And you can see the something which is a patented Indian molecule which will improve the outcome in patients. So if you need to have a maximum benefit, you need to add on. This is an add-on therapy on rosuvastatin, and it will be very interesting that to see that the patients who are on a statin, if they are pre-diabetic, they become diabetic. So if you start, but if you add saroglitazole to control the triglyceride, that effect of turning the pre-diabetic into diabetic also gets balanced. So if you are starting, rosuvastatin or atorvastatin, and the patient has got a high triglyceride, better to add saroglitazole. And we have seen that turning these patients into a lot of meetings, we get questions that, doctor, is it good to turn these patients by using statins from pre-diabetic to diabetic? We say that the benefit is so much with statins in decreasing the cardiovascular event that it would decrease the, it is beneficial to continue with statin. But I would say that if you add saroglitazole, the outcomes would be better. A lot of other studies, I think I don't have the time to really discuss it, but we'll go to the summary that due to the South Asian phenotype, the most common form of dyslipidemia in India is hypertriglyceride, followed by low HDL, which is something which is really bad, because there is no molecule which has really shown to improve the outcomes by increasing the HDL level. And the insulin resistance is the primary root cause of multiple metabolic disorders. So you need to have, controlling the triglyceride. You need to have MSLD should be controlled, and there is one molecule, saroglitazole, which will do all the job, and then obviously be complemented with the statins and the lifestyle modification. So lowering the triglyceride level, improving the blood glucose control, and no incremental effect on serum creatinine or eGFR level of this. So I think this is a molecule which is going to be the number one. So in the moment you get pre-diabetes, have high triglyceride, have fatty liver, it is always better to start it. So thank you very much for your kind attention.
Three more minutes, sir.
3 more minutes. I don't trust you now.
So, just 2 small questions, Dr. Viveka. So, talk us about the recently published JAC, which talked about PCSK9 inhibitors early in ACS.
Yeah, so I think if you look at the data from early use of PCSK9 inhibitor, not only it decreases all the cholesterol, so it decreases the LDL, it decreases the triglyceride, and more importantly, almost 30% reduction in lipoprotein(a), which does not come down with any other statin. So that is something which is very important, and we are doing one trial at Max, which is called oral PCSK9 inhibitor, which is going to be a boon, because there are a lot of patients who wouldn't like to have an injectable form. And the other beauty of this JAC paper is that we have got other competitor molecule, which is inclisiran. So if you give inclisiran after ACS, it effect is slightly delayed, so it is 6 weeks to 2 months, and then, but the critical period of first 2 weeks is something which is achieved by injectable PCSK9 inhibitors. I would say that now we have started a strategy that the moment the patient comes with CCS, we give them subcutaneous PCSK9 inhibitor, and then simultaneously or maybe after a week we give them inclisiran, and then keep them on maintenance therapy of inclisiran, and that is the best strategy.
Why I asked this question was because Jack said that not only reduces LDL, this is an anti-inflammatory agent. So, as observed by the FTG PET scan, which said that it reduces inflammation in the myocardium, it reduces platelet aggregation, reduces thrombotic events, and platelet reactivity, prevents remodeling as well.
Yeah,
So
the
these
1 year between.
wonderful drugs have to be used as early as possible in ACS.
Yeah, so we use, initially people had said that we should use it after pre-discharge or something
Within
like that,
24 hours,
pre-discharge.
sir.
So now we are starting that
Yes.
we load with aspirin, ticagrelor, statin 80 milligram, but I think this is a molecule which should be given right away so that the risk of repeat events come down.
Sir, my second question would be regarding lipoproteins, lipid and CABS. Talking about that.
Yeah, so lipoprotein, LPA.
High levels of lipoprotein level A.
Yeah, so that is something which is genetically determined.
Yeah.
It has been seen that the South Asian populations are at a higher risk, so genetically they have got higher LPS level A levels, and that increases the risk of, because it facilitates the deposition of cholesterol into the endothelium and causes increased risk of cardiovascular event. So I would say that any molecule, so unfortunately statins does not decrease the lipoprotein A. So the only 2 molecules which have been shown to decrease the,
I'm referring to the CABS, sir.
yeah. So the 2 molecules which really would decrease it is the PCSK9 inhibitors and the inclisiran.
Sir, CABS. Talk
Yeah,
about
sir.
the CABS.
So I think the CABS trial,
No, sir, not the trial.
Mm.
It's a calcified aortic valve stenosis.
no, so calcified aortic valve stenosis.
See more if you have raised
No, so
lipoprotein.
that is the calcified aortic stenosis has been shown. So we say that if the patient has got moderate or moderately severe aortic stenosis, the 2 molecules which have shown to decrease the progression is one is the statin or the, you can give the PCSK9 inhibitor, so anyway, which decreases the total cholesterol. And the second thing which has been shown to, the DAPA-TAVI trial has shown that if you give dapagliflozin, then also the outcomes are much better. So if the calcific aortic stenosis can be modified with these 2 molecules, the statins, the PCSK9 inhibitor, inclisiran, and the dapagliflozin, and now we have got a device which has, percutaneously we can place in the ascending aorta, which modifies the aortic flow of the blood flow, which decreases the stress of the aortic valve and can decrease the progression, so slow down the progression of moderate aortic stenosis to severe. So I think it's still a work in progress, but these disease-modifying agents are really
Small interfering RNAs probably.
I'm counting number of questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My no question. मुझे याद आ गया सवेरे वाली गाड़ी से चले जाएंगे तो आप थैंक यू वेरी मच. So now I give 2 hats to Dr. Chauhan, one for Dr. Ruchi Verma and one for myself.
Sir, please
Thank you
come.
very much.
Please come.